Wang Sam stood in front of the chained Lee Cheol-soo, his presence radiating arrogance as he observed the prisoner's pale complexion. There was no hint of compassion in Wang Sam's gaze, only a cruel satisfaction as he enjoyed the imbalance of power. Lee Cheol-soo, bound and vulnerable, could feel the weight of Wang Sam's words bearing down on him. The idea of living in the palace, stripped of his freedom but promised survival, echoed bitterly in his mind. It wasn't entirely untrue, he admitted. Memories of his past life flashed vividly before him, visions of the influence he had wielded. His power second only to the emperor himself. But the glory and prestige of that power felt hollow now, grimly reminding him of what it had cost him. A flicker of anger crossed his face, transforming his irritation into something more profound. He clenched his fists tightly, his chains rattling softly in the silence. He thought of reliving such a fate, bound not only by metal but by the shackles of circumstance, filled him with rage. His jaw tightened as a thought boiled to the surface of his mind, a bitter truth he could no longer suppress. With a surge of emotion, Lee Cheol-soo's internal energy roared to life, rippling through the room like a sudden tempest. The surrounding air grew heavy, as if the very walls were bowing to his suppressed power. The chains that had bound Lee Cheol-soo shattered with a resounding clang, fragments scattering across the cold, unyielding floor. Standing amidst the broken restraints, he straightened, his eyes reflecting a calm yet piercing resolve. His body, once stripped of all internal energy, now seemed invigorated by an unseen force. He reflected on his peculiar state. The rewind of physical time had robbed him of his cultivated power, but his mind, steeped in the wisdom and experience of his past life, remained unscathed. That knowledge, undiminished and intact, now served as his greatest weapon. Wang Sam staggered under the oppressive force that radiated from Lee Cheol-soo. The air grew dense, heavy with an otherworldly chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. Despite his efforts to maintain composure, his expression betrayed fear and confusion. His eyes darted to the shattered chains and back to Lee Cheol-soo, unable to comprehend how this man, seemingly powerless moments ago, had overturned the situation so decisively. Before Wang Sam could voice his disbelief, the room was engulfed in an icy stillness. The energy Lee Cheol-soo released permeated every corner of the space, freezing everything in its wake. Lee Cheol-soo's thoughts raced as he pieced together the nature of his predicament. The realization dawned swiftly. This was no physical confrontation, but a battle unfolding within the vast expanse of his mental world. If this realm was shaped by his mind, then the cultivation level he had seemingly lost in the physical realm remained intact here. Confidence surged through him as he raised his hand, his intent piercing through the fabricated layers of the illusion. With a decisive motion, the mirage shattered like fragile glass, splintering into nothingness. This deception, however elaborate, was all too familiar. The thought of Jang Ehyun orchestrating such an elaborate ploy to test or ensnare him only fueled his growing irritation. Memories of his long-settled score with Wang Sam flared briefly, adding to his disdain for the charade. But before he could act further, a sultry voice echoed from behind, halting him in his tracks. Turning sharply, he found himself surrounded by a group of young women, each of them impossibly beautiful, their gazes filled with alluring intent. Their presence exuded a captivating charm, the kind that could unravel even the most disciplined mind. One of them stepped forward, her teasing tone carrying a disarming confidence as she praised him. Her words were a subtle melody, coaxing him to let down his guard and indulge in the illusion she offered. The others followed suit, their movements graceful and enticing, weaving a seductive web around him. Lee Cheol-soo's irritation surged, his patience wearing thin. He recognized the layers of manipulation woven into the illusion, the attempts to exploit base desires to weaken his resolve. His jaw tightened as his fury ignited, a fiery determination replacing any hint of distraction. Clenching his fist, he channeled his energy, the force radiating outward like a tidal wave. The illusory figures wavered, their enchanting forms flickering as the array began to crack under his power. With a final, resounding blow, Lee Cheol-soo swung his fist, unleashing a surge of raw will that obliterated the formation. The illusion disintegrated into fragments, vanishing into the void from which it was conjured. A figure emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding and undeniable. The man carried a sword, his gaze locked onto Lee Cheol-soo. And with a swift motion, he unleashed a wave of sword aura that tore through the atmosphere like a tempest. The sheer force of the attack left no doubt about his mastery, a power honed to perfection. Instinct took over as Lee Cheol-soo braced himself against the incoming assault. Summoning every ounce of strength at his disposal, he moved to defend, but the overwhelming force of the attack proved too much. The sword aura struck with unrelenting ferocity, sending him hurtling backward through the air. His body collided with a massive boulder, the impact resounding like thunder as the stone cracked beneath the force. Pain surged through him as he struggled to rise, his limbs trembling under the strain. The attack had not only left him physically battered but had also shaken him to his core. Yet, even in his weakened state, his mind raced, piecing together the identity of the man before him. The power of that sword aura was unmistakable, peerless and unmatched, a force that could only belong to one man. The figure standing before him was none other than the celestial sword lord, Emogukja. Revered as the greatest master of the Gongdong sect and hailed as the #1 under heaven, Emogukja had once saved the martial world from the devastating invasion of the blood cult 3 centuries ago. His legend was etched into history, a figure of awe and respect. Lee Cheol-soo darted across the battlefield, his movements fluid and desperate as he evaded the relentless onslaught unleashed by Emogukja. The air was thick with the oppressive aura of sword energy, each strike from the celestial sword lord carrying the weight of his unparalleled mastery. Though Lee Cheol-soo's voice carried the urgency of his plea, his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Emogukja's attacks continued, each one a testament to the fury of a man unwilling to trust so easily. His strikes were swift and unrelenting, designed to test and break the resolve of his opponent. Emogukja's eyes burned with righteous indignation as he pressed the attack. He could see through the surface. Lee Cheol-soo's movements carried the precision and insight of a true master, yet his martial prowess was notably lacking, as though his physical abilities had not caught up to his knowledge. To Emogukja, this incongruity only deepened the suspicion surrounding the man before him. The aura of rebellion surrounding Lee Cheol-soo further fueled Emogukja's mistrust. This was not the demeanor of an ordinary martial artist. It was the aura of someone who had defied the natural order, a trait often associated with the blood cult's machinations. Emogukja's voice, filled with grim authority, demanded answers, his tone sharp and unyielding. Lee Cheol-soo, battered and worn, dropped to his knees in a gesture of humility and respect. His voice, steady yet reverent, carried across the space as he formally addressed the figure before him. The sincerity in his words cut through the tension, his declaration unmistakable. A disciple of the Gongdong sect paying homage to the legendary ancestor who stood before him. Emogukja, the celestial sword lord, paused mid-strike, the fury in his expression melting into a hearty laugh that echoed like rolling thunder. His sharp gaze softened as he regarded Lee Cheol-soo, recognizing the disciple's cleverness and courage. The technique Lee Cheol-soo had employed, one rooted in the sect's profound teachings, confirmed his identity beyond any doubt. Lowering his weapon, Emogukja stepped forward, offering a hand to help Lee Cheol-soo rise. His tone shifted to one of approval as he introduced himself, revealing the truth of his presence. This was no longer the living master of legend, but the remnant of consciousness left behind, preserved through time for moments such as these. Emogukja marveled at the uniqueness of his successor, a man who bore traces of both the blood cult's path and the path of immortality. Lee Cheol-soo, though composed, could not hide his confusion. He declared his unwavering allegiance to the Gongdong sect, emphasizing his identity despite any connection to the blood cult. His words carried a defiance rooted in his loyalty, yet they also hinted at his uncertainty about what this revelation might mean for his future. Emogukja regarded him with a contemplative expression, as though he were assessing not just Lee Cheol-soo's worth, but also the peculiar circumstances that had shaped him. To Emogukja, the convergence of opposing forces within this one man was not a matter of condemnation but rather a curious possibility. He mused aloud, his words laced with the wisdom of centuries, about the nature of balance and the enigmatic will of the heavens. Perhaps, he considered, the use of an anomaly to confront a greater anomaly was not a deviation but the natural order's answer to upheaval. His acceptance of this possibility lent a profound gravity to his demeanor, as though he had glimpsed a sliver of destiny in the figure standing before him. With the tension dissipating, Emogukja's eyes sparkled with a mixture of amusement and intrigue. This meeting was no longer a trial but the beginning of a new chapter, one that might carry the legacy of the Gongdong sect into uncharted realms of possibility. Lee Cheol-soo stood in thoughtful silence, the weight of Emogukja's words settling over him like an unseen shroud. The concept of fighting fire with fire, of an anomaly confronting another, gnawed at the edges of his understanding. To him, his journey had always been singular in its focus, a desperate bid to restore what he had lost. His attempt at reincarnation had been nothing more than a means to regrow his manhood, a gamble that had inadvertently flung him back through time. Yet now, the implications of his existence seemed far grander, more intertwined with the forces shaping the martial world. Despite the swirling questions, a flicker of determination sparked within Lee Cheol-soo. There was something more pressing, something that had occupied his thoughts since encountering the remnants of the celestial sword lord's consciousness. Raising his head, his expression shifted to one of resolve, and he turned his attention fully to the legendary figure. The legacy left behind by Emogukja was a tantalizing enigma. Lee Cheol-soo's mind sifted through fragments of knowledge and memories, piecing together a plausible conclusion. He and his senior had already divided the treasured elixirs of Hongyangtae and Mida Song-soo, leaving only one possibility remaining, the fabled martial arts that were said to be the true inheritance of the Sword Lord. With deliberate intent, Lee Cheol-soo lowered his gaze and clasped his hands in a gesture of humility and respect. His request was made not for himself but for another, a plea that underscored his selflessness. If such martial arts still existed, if the legacy of the Celestial Sword Lord could yet be passed down, he wished for them to be entrusted to his senior, the companion who had journeyed alongside him. After voicing his request, Lee Cheol-soo's thoughts turned inward, his expression momentarily clouded by deep contemplation. The weight of his aspirations and the role he wished to play within the Gongdong sect filled his mind. He had spent countless hours considering the future of the sect, the responsibility of its revival, and the pivotal figure who should bear that burden, Eugene Wee. To inherit the teachings of the Celestial Sword Lord would mean grasping a power nearly unparalleled, a force capable of elevating him to the apex of strength. Such a path could transform him into a figure of immense influence, perhaps even a legend in his own right. Yet, as the idea lingered, a wry smile tugged at the corners of his lips. The ambitions that stirred within him were far from conventional. Lee Cheol-soo had no desire to stand at the forefront, bearing the responsibilities and sacrifices that came with leadership. His aspirations were simpler yet no less determined. He envisioned himself as the ultimate second-in-command, wielding enough power to safeguard his own interests and enjoy a life of ease, free from the crushing weight of authority. It was Eugene Wee, with her potential and determination, who should shoulder the task of rebuilding the Gongdong sect. Resolving himself, Lee Cheol-soo stood firm in his decision. There was no need for him to play the role of the protagonist in this grand narrative. His goals were clear: to master the restored martial arts of the Gongdong sect and carve out a place for himself that allowed him to thrive without hardship. Emogukja's expression darkened as he addressed Lee Cheol-soo's request, his tone laced with mocking incredulity. The Celestial Sword Lord spoke with an authority that dismissed any notion of coincidence, challenging the idea that fate had guided Lee Cheol-soo to this moment. There was a sharpness to his voice, a stern warning about the naivety of such beliefs. The revelation that followed struck Lee Cheol-soo like a thunderclap. His mind reeled as the implications of Emogukja's words began to unravel. The mention of a looming disaster tied to the demonic path sent a chill through him, and his thoughts immediately turned to the blood cult, the dreaded force that had once threatened the martial world. His breathing quickened as he grappled with the unsettling possibility. The blood cult had been a shadow of the past, a dark chapter that had seemingly closed with Emogukja's heroic triumph centuries ago. The idea that such a calamity could resurface was almost unthinkable. Yet, the unwavering conviction in Emogukja's tone suggested otherwise. In a moment of dawning realization, Lee Cheol-soo's thoughts coalesced into a chilling conclusion. The Celestial Sword Lord's warnings pointed to an inevitability he had not considered, a return of the blood cult. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and disbelief washed over him as he confronted the possibility that history might yet repeat itself. The weight of this revelation settled heavily on Lee Cheol-soo. What had begun as a personal journey to reclaim his life and rebuild the Gongdong sect now seemed entangled with a much larger destiny, one that carried the echoes of a past conflict and the ominous promise of its resurgence.